Larry Hausner here, the author of Save Baseball, a prescription for the major leagues. You can pick up my book anywhere online, and I encourage you to do so. All right, who's ready for spring training? Me. I'm sure you are as well. Well, about a month out, so we're getting close, but it's that time of year where we're just jonesing for some baseball, right? Well, in a previous video, I discussed two overarching issues that are facing Major League Baseball. And remember, my goal with my book was not just to point out issues in the game, but to talk to those in the game that know more than me and try to come up with some solutions, of course, by those folks that potentially know how to overcome them. So, again, here they are. Number one, MLB has been experiencing declining attendance, actually hemorrhaging, in fact, by millions over the last decade plus. And other major issue facing Major League Baseball is simply declining fan interest. So, in my book, I highlight the current state of a declining attendance in Major League Baseball, again, by the millions. And fans are just not seemingly attending and watching games. And I believe that, while baseball is still popular in some cities, it may sadly be heading down the path of becoming a niche sport and a fringe sport in places not named Los Angeles, Boston, St. Louis, Chicago, New York. So in this video, I'm going to cover the lack of fan interest as it relates to baseball's appeal. And I discovered in my research for my book that there is not one silver bullet to overcome the issue. It's a complicated one. So I'm going to assume you're a baseball fan. Obviously, you're watching my channel, which is dedicated to baseball. So you're probably a baseball fan. And most likely, it's your favorite sport or one of your favorite sports, as it is mine. Unfortunately, while we love the game, its popularity is diminishing. So some of that research that I stumbled upon and dug deep to find started with a Gallup poll. We've all heard of Gallup. And this poll was in 2017. And believe it or not, it's the most recent one that they've conducted. I think it's time that they do one again. But the question they asked fans is, what is your favorite sport to watch? So the four major sports, the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NHL finished in the top five, 4 out of 5. The Gallup poll also included other sports, such as tennis, golf, auto racing, boxing, soccer, right? Soccer. So no surprise that the National Football League continues to reign supreme in terms of watchability. It is a great television product, and it's also one in which fans sell out even for the lousiest teams, or, well, they come close to it at least. But I mentioned soccer a moment ago. Interestingly, soccer has grown in popularity in the United States and has surpassed the NHL as America's fourth favorite sport to watch. And I say heads up baseball. Soccer is closing in on you. From 2013 to 2017, soccer's popularity nearly doubled, while baseball's during that time fell a shocking 35%. So there was an annual poll that surveys baseball fandom conducted by Marist that showed that only 31% of those responded said baseball is a large part of what people talk about or follow during the Major League Baseball season, which makes me wonder, what other sport are they talking about if it's not baseball during the baseball season? An additional 42% reported that the subject of baseball is sometimes part of the conversation, and close to 1 in 4, 23%, said baseball is not part of the water cooler discussion. It appears that baseball isn't much of the sports talk conversation, even during its own season. That should be cause for concern. I'm concerned about it. What's most surprisingly about baseball is that it virtually has no competition from other major sports during the summer months. Think about it. The NFL is, well, they're conducting training camps, and the NBA and the NHL seasons are on hiatus during the summer. So Major League Baseball should dominate the market, for the exception of Wimbledon or other one off events. For my book, I interviewed political commentator and the author of the highly acclaimed baseball book, Men at Work. And of course, George Will. And he had a perspective on this conversation. He said, when we were young, Larry, baseball had the undivided attention of the country from, well, like the 1st of April until Michigan played Ohio State. Today, there's 6 and 7 weeks between the last NBA championship game and the first NFL preseason game. And George Will added that the competition for the sports fans' attention and their money, time, and space that's dedicated to baseball and all sports in the summer on social media. Remember, we used to call those newspapers back in the day, and sports radio as well. And all the rest suggests that the competition is severe. And George also said that baseball right now is just not competing. By the way, see the picture behind me? That is a game between the White Sox and the Rangers earlier in 2024. That's a real game. You can see the guys on the field. So the White Sox were horrible last year, but were they this bad? I mean, there's like nobody at this game. So another poll from Marist a couple of years back found that 56% of American adults do not follow baseball at all. I mean, what is going on here? That number rises to 67% not following baseball among ages 18 to 37. So those, we'll call them young kids, and I write about the generational studies. It kind of was the launching point for this book. It's surprising. So now you know why I wrote this book and focused on the topic. Remember, I shared with you that my then teenage son telling me that baseball was boring, although at 24 years old now, he's a huge fan. But it got me thinking about that generation, and that data that I shared moments ago is alarming. That the younger generations, it's plural because they overlap, are just not interested in the game. The proportion of Americans who say they are baseball fans matches its lowest in 10 years. Only 44% of Americans currently say they watch baseball at all. 7% say a great deal. 7%. 8%, a good amount. And 29% say a little bit. And as I just mentioned, a majority, 56%. This is crazy, so I'm repeating it. Do not watch America's so-called pastime at all. The proportion of baseball fans is down substantially in the last decade. How about older Americans? I kind of chuckle at this because, of course, I'm looking at these data points as older being 45 years or older. Not that we think 45-year-olds are, on the older side, but for this study, they were considered that. So those older Americans, age 45 or greater, are more likely than younger Americans to say that baseball, is something that they are interested in and they're fans. Interestingly, racial differences are also persistent. 48% of white Americans and 43% of Latinos, compared to 35% of African Americans, say, yeah, we're fans. It's also based on where we live in the country. Americans who live in the Northeast and Midwest are more likely than those in the South and West to call themselves baseball fans. It all adds up to baseball losing its appeal, which is alarming. Jay Jaffe of Fangraphs, he suggested that the on the field problems for baseball, the way the game has evolved the last 2 decades, what it looks like between the lines, towards more strikeouts and fewer balls in play, is part of the problem. Rich Luker, he conducted a poll in 2020 and he asked fans which sport you're most interested in today. Not surprisingly, coming out on top, the NFL, 23.1%. However, Major League Baseball was only 14%. Why such a low response for baseball? Well, Theodore Sprenzel of Suite 101 suggests that today's fans and consumers desire entertainment that is blatant and straightforward. And baseball, requires more than just surface level observation and is therefore losing some appeal. To that point, Peter Pansy of Bleacher Report says that baseball requires knowledge and patience of the fans much more than any of the other major sports. That's not new, though, right? It also lacks the fast pace and action paced intrigue compared to other sports as well, he said. And he also added the baseball fans typically have to know and understand more, much more, than the casual fan. They have to be patient as well. And that's something that is difficult in this day and age. In reality, baseball is becoming a victim of its own game play, says he. Hard to argue. And he's right. Baseball isn't boring, it just takes away it, following it, and appreciating it. And let's be real, attention spans for all of us have diminished the last decade plus with mobile devices and social media providing us instant news and sports and answers to the questions that we used to just let go unanswered. As one comedian said recently, I saw on a YouTube video, what did we do before Google? I guess we just didn't know. That's pretty much the world we live in now. We do know in seconds. So, as I wrote about in the book, it's well documented that the attendance at Major League Baseball games has been declining since about 2007. About 71 million fans attended Major League Baseball games in the season and just concluded in 2024. And that's down from a peak of nearly 80 million fans in 2027. So a friend of mine, a former major leaguer, Scott Carl, former pitcher, lefty, who also, by the way, was my color commentator when I was the voice of the Honolulu Sharks in the Hawaii Winter Baseball League. And Scott pitched for a number of years. I look up his stats, had a pretty impressive career. And we were talking about this subject. He said that baseball is not instant, and it never has been. And as far as other sports are concerned, it is a little slower. And I'll add that even with the pitch clock, so is today's game. So it's still a little slower. And that begs the question, is the game of baseball unwatchable? And I'm talking about the way the game is played. So has the game on the field changed for the worse? What are your thoughts on that? I've talked to lots of folks about that. Some, even those who played it, would sadly say yes. My buddy Scott Carl, he said, you know what, Larry, I can't believe it, but I don't even like watching baseball because of its style today. He said, it's just not entertaining. And here's a guy who pitched 6 years in the big leagues, and he went on to say that he is stunned that he is disinterested in baseball, a guy that pitched in the big leagues and not terribly long ago. He said it's like beer league softball, to home run or to strikeout. And he's spot on. Fans also believe that the game of baseball that they grew up with is kind of lost. It's meaningless statistics, endless statistics, instant replay appeals, home runs or strikeouts, as Scott Carl said, and pitchers being practically, strip searched these days for foreign substances after most half innings. So here's one for you. Take a guess as to the collective batting average. This is the way the game's being played on the field these days. So in 2024, what do you think the collective batting average of Major League Baseball was? Now, wait a minute. Don't put me on pause and look it up. Don't cheat. Are you ready for it? 243. I mean, come on. That is absolutely brutal, and it is nearly unwatchable. So, how much action is really going on when more than 3 out of 4 batters, 3 out of 4, make an out? So, would you watch the NBA if 75%, that's 3 out of 4, of their shots were bricks and they never went in? Of course, you wouldn't, and neither would anybody else. So, Hall of Famer Mike Schmidt, hey, he's very opinionated on the subject, and he said hitters are being led astray by information that hitting the ball in the air is better than on the ground. That's a guy hit over 500 home runs. He said striking out in their mind now it's just 1 out. And a high velocity off the bat, perfect launch angle makes a great hitter. Clearly, he doesn't agree with that. And he says the decline of hitters today is less directly in the hitter's inability to hit the high fastball and the lack of accountability, there it is, for striking out. So, had a lot of fun writing this book. Interviewed a lot of people in the game, including World Series winning manager Joe Maddon. So Joe said, I don't think we're ever going to see a Triple Crown winner again. He said it's not even being discussed. That's crazy. So Scott Karl said, Larry, this is solvable. But he says, I think the onus is on the owners and the players. But he says it begins with the players and it falls on their shoulders to make the game better. He said, we know we have some recent changes with the shift of late, but they're still shifting to a degree. He says, hit against it, be better, and pitchers pitch. Former Cincinnati Reds general manager Wayne Krivsky, who had spent 41 years in the game, spent some time with Wayne, and he agrees. He says, every night, it's a strikeout, walk, or home run. He says it's home run derby, just like Scott Karl said. He says it's sad to see the damage done to the game. So to their point, during the 2021 season, more than 1/3, that 35% of all Major League plate appearances ended in one of the 3 true outcomes: home run, walk, strikeout, which was the highest of all time. That's hard to watch that, wouldn't you say? It makes for an uninteresting product on the field. Here's another. While balls in play have decreased, home runs and strikeouts have dramatically increased. Strikeouts are significantly on the rise over the past decade. I mean, who could imagine that strikeouts will become an acceptable norm in the game of baseball? But it's happened. I was also fortunate to spend some time with manager Buck Showalter. We talked about the same set of circumstances with the game. And he said, Larry, walks and home runs and strikeouts, not entertaining. He said, don't blame the players. They're getting rewarded for playing the game that way. And he said, the game has moved toward more efficiency over entertainment. And he said, that's the problem. And we have also lost the shame of failure in our game. Striking out is no longer a big deal. That's crazy. In addition to a lack of action on the field, bad play itself, and the idea that I have stated before, and I have a video on it, tanking teams are to blame. If you haven't seen that video, I encourage you to watch it. Again, it's dedicated to the topic of tanking when I ask the question to you fans, simply, did your team tank this year? All right, so how about analytics? It's got to be part of the conversation, and we all have opinions on it. Most of us don't mind statistics. I mean, that's why we're baseball fans. I mean, I grew up watching baseball whenever there was were games on, which was usually the Saturday game of the week. And I love baseball cards because I could read those statistics. But the question is, have they gotten out of hand? So, do you think that there's been a negative impact, or maybe you say a positive one, on the game from analytics? And has that impacted fan interest? So, Buck Showalter told me Major League Baseball managers are being controlled more by the Harvard graduates, I'll call them nerds, in the front office. You know what Joe Madden calls them? The mathematicians. Somewhere, I got to believe Connie Mack, and Casey Stengel, and Earl Weaver are rolling over somewhere. Did you imagine Earl Weaver listening to a Harvard graduate telling him who's going to be in his lineup today? I don't know about you, but I would love to have heard that conversation if it would have ever taken place. Joe Madden, he added this. He says the game is scripted and it's controlled by the front office from the top down. Teams have spent a lot of money on their analytics departments. And while he supports a balance, he feels that the analytics people don't have much to do. So, you know what they do? Spend their time finding things out, like overboard. I also had a chance to talk to Jay Eddings. This guy's been a scout for 20 plus years, also played in the minor leagues in the Cubs organization. He told me analytics are being forced upon the scouts like him and a lot of coaches at all levels in baseball. And those coaches do not like the Harvard analytics people, he said. And a huge concern that Eddings noted that baseball is losing great athletes. Well, how is that possible? Well, you know how? He pointed it out. He says, these analytics people either say these players are good or they're not today. They rarely factor in their potential. We know one thing about baseball. When you're drafted, most typically what happens? You spend a few years in the minor leagues. This is not the NBA or the NFL. You get drafted and you're immediately at the highest level in the sport. So there is potential that needs to be factored in, but not when you look at analytics. That data does not factor in potential. So let's be realistic as well. Recently, patience just not a strength in baseball industry. So factoring in, potential, which is not instant, it's not today, it's tomorrow and next year and the year after, is just not something that's a strength of baseball. So Buck doesn't find launch angle or spin rate entertaining as well. He said the game is not won with spin rate or launch angle. He says until the value of a home run changes, he could care less if the ball scrapes off the fence for a home run or it goes 500 feet. It just doesn't matter. It is true that baseball has always been a game of statistics. And analytics, however, as Showalter concluded in our conversation, he says, we're looking at things too robotically. But these are not robots, they're human beings. In the end, baseball's popularity and fan interest are declining, sadly. But what do you see? You're a baseball fan. You've listened to me for, numerous videos, and this has kind of been a theme that I've talked about. Now I've kind of jumped in a little deeper in this video here. So are you concerned? If so, what do you think are the possible solutions to overcoming this? I'd love you to share your thoughts in the comments here. And I want to know what you're thinking. Clearly, I'm concerned. Look, I'm wearing a shirt, right? Save Baseball. It's the name of my book and YouTube channel here. So we know that I'm concerned. Otherwise, I wouldn't have spent all this time, years on this subject. And you know what? When I talk to people, when I interviewed them for my book, I started with a question. I said, here's what I see. What do you think? And what I told them was what I led with. There's declining interest in baseball and declining attendance. Am I wrong? Nobody said I was off base. But finding answers is a little bit difficult, and that's what it's what the book's about. So in a future video, we'll talk more about the solutions I learned, and I'll share them with you. Until then, Please like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Appreciate that. And always share. Until next time, for the love of the game, I'm Larry Hausner.